Students, hello and welcome back to economics. Today, we are going to be talking about property and property rights. Who owns what, why is it important, and what effects it has on our overall economy. So without further ado, let's get to the assignment called property rights. And that is 9/8/2020. And here are the directions. Here are plans for today. Highlighted text indicates that you need to write and submit information to this assignment. Ensure you've completed all requirements in the what to submit section near the bottom. Participation will be rewarded for participating in class discussion if we end up working on this lesson as a class. So step one is to really take in and look at this picture and really decipher what it means. As with all of my other lessons, these images are really supposed to be the representation in your mind of what we're talking about. So if you can get a good idea of what these pictures are from the onset, you likely have a good idea of what we're talking about for the entire lesson. So for this, I see some dude who looks extremely unhappy. He has like that really sad face down here. He looks like he's protecting his little home. And then there's this other hand coming in. This is a very patriotic looking hand, and it's like way bigger than he is. And it looks like the hand is trying to get at his house, right, for whatever reason. And what this brings to mind is this idea of public versus private property. What that guy owns versus maybe what this hand owns or what the government owns. Does this hand have the right to take this guy's house? Is the right to have this house left with this guy? I don't know. Who decides this? Why is it important? How does this enshrine in our laws? And how does this make a difference with how people conduct themselves within an economy? Once we get into our mindset that private property, like this guy probably feels is important, that really makes a difference whenever we really want to take it through sometimes the courts and take it on to the economy. So it's really a question of who owns what and why is that important. Step two, we're going to do a short PowerPoint. And while I'm talking through this PowerPoint, I want you to answer this prompt. What types of property are the most important in the United States and why? That'll be 10 points. So let's look through this PowerPoint together with some information. And so this is property rights. And this picture right here is really continuing on with the idea of who owns what. If somebody has something in their name, do they really own it? What things can't be owned by people? What things should not be owned by people? What things need to be managed by the government? What things are better left for the people to manage themselves? We'll get into all of that. So with this fish, between these two different parties right here, no, it's mine. I caught it first. It's mine. Does getting something first mean it is yours? Or is it some other requirement that decides what is yours? So the first type we have is open access property. And through these images, we see things like space. We see the ocean. So when you think open access property, really think in your mind open access because it can be accessed by anybody. Now think to yourselves, does it make sense for individuals to own these things? Own space, to own the ocean? Maybe not, but we need these things, right? There's a lot to be left to be explored as well too with these in terms of their value to humans, but their overall value to the earth and our greater solar system as well too. So open access property, things that can be openly accessed by anybody. Can be claimed and used by anybody. There's no exclusive and transferable rights. So think of what exclusive might mean in your head. If you exclude somebody, that means that you leave them out, right? So you can't leave anybody out of this. There's no transferable rights in this. Nobody gets to make the decision or call the shots on who owns this property, rightfully so. The next is another varying degree. So we're moving on the scale a little bit. To common property. And this one is a little bit more specific than open access property, even though they are quite similar as well too. So we have things like ponds, we have woodsy areas, We have open grazing lands, fisheries right here. So this is where people really do kind of stake claims to parts of these as well too, right? You might have a property with a pond on it. Is it a part of that property? Even if it's contributing to the greater ecosystem? What about fisheries where fish like to gather and fishermen make a living off of them? The thing with common property is that we need to keep a good balance because we're really keeping in touch with the animals there, the ecosystem like economy as well too. All these things are related. In addition, like there's huge industries for timber or woods to be sold. If this is all common property, if people use all of this up, we might have to be afraid for not only the economy itself, but for the ecosystems in which people are using them from. So common property means it can be accessed by anybody, but people do make use of this land, and how they use it has really insane consequences unless there are specific laws dictating how these people can use these lands. So common property, resources supervised by a limited group or individuals. Groups can exclude others from using the property. So again, exclusive rights exclude to leave somebody out. Tradition dictates these common goods. And for the examples, fisheries, pond, and grazing land. Now, public property. And this is a really interesting word. Whenever people think of public property, it really means that there is some level of community to it. Again, this is kind of like a common area or property, and it's usually managed by local, state, and central or federal government. So public property, we're thinking something in public. We think about public libraries, public parks, public streets, public roads, public schools. Who really has the power to say what happens in here? Well, indirectly, it's people who vote, right? It could be citizens who do, because they elect people to manage these areas. And the management of these resources can be left to things like the Department of Education, if we're talking about schools, parks, local park services, and then road management. But these are all really under government entities who oversee the management of these, usually on the local level. So public property, as I said, is a type of common property, resources that are owned by everybody, and its access and use are controlled by the state or community. Think to yourself too, when does the state or the government have the right to restrict these properties from certain people? And think about maybe historically, whenever some of these places might have been restricted to certain groups of people, and how that influences what we think about public in the word public property. Now, finally, we have private property. You might think of a house, a business. And this is a weird one too. If you create your own idea, you publish your own ideas, you like watch maybe like a YouTube video or something, and people have a bunch of original ideas, or they come up with copyrights or licenses or patents. That's called intellectual property. That's your own private intellectual property. And that's abundant here in the United States, right? We really pride ourselves in being a nation built on big business, small business, and people really making a living because of the private property that individuals are able to own. Private property, the property that is exclusive to some individuals who have the buying power to get it and to manage it as well. And here are some examples of how private property can be managed, making their own rules for if you're on in a business, right? Copyrights, patents, licenses, trademarks. Private property owned by individuals who can decide how to use the resources contained within. These things are central to capitalism. So we talked a little bit about capitalism before. And this is where a country's trade and industry are controlled by private owners for profit rather than by the state. And without private property, there is no capitalism. As we talked about with lessons previously, communism in its purest form is a society without private property. On the other hand, private property is absolutely essential to capitalism because that allows people to make business. And so we can define it in these categories. Excludable, can we exclude people from using it? And rivalrous, is there competition for these goods or for these types of property? And then we have an externality. Now this is where we have to think really deeply about the effect that property has on society. Take a few seconds just to kind of think about what on earth we're seeing in these pictures. So in the first one, we have a person smoking. Next one, we have traffic. Over here, we have smokestacks. And here we have people in a classroom. Think about if you've ever heard the word external before. EX means on the outside. Think about if you exit something. External or EX, that prefix means on the outside. So an externality is when an exchange between a buyer and seller has an impact on a third party who's not part of the exchange. So these are the consequences of an interaction between types of property, right? This guy has a cigarette and he bought this cigarette as a part of his private property, but he is blowing smoke into open access or public or even common property. The externality is the consequence of that. If a lot of people are doing this, what are those consequences in the big picture? It could be bad for other people's health. It could be bad for the environment. What about traffic? Well, it creates pollution. Certainly, it creates noise pollution. Imagine if you have a house on the side of the road next to a busy street. The externality would be the consequences of living by there. So you would get a lot of noise pollution. You get pollution near you. You might always have lights near your house. That might lower the value of your house. In fact, I'm positive it would. And that's the externality. So the consequence on the outside from an exchange in these properties. Some dude over here, he bought a car, and because of how this public property, these roads are being managed, suddenly the house that you have on the side of this road is worth less because it's in this circumstance. So what are the consequences? I really want you to be thinking about the consequences of all of these different things. Education, that's a public, usually public good provided for people. And the externality is the knowledge that can go out into society and how that knowledge can be used for the betterment of society as a whole, helping people get jobs, helping people get through school. So they can be positive or negative as well too. So the smoking one would be negative, the education one would be positive. So think about maybe some of these examples. You're a bird watcher, your neighbor has put several birdhouses in the yard as well as planting trees and flowers that attract birds. Is that a positive or a negative externality? Is the consequence positive or negative? Your neighbor paints his house a hideous color. If your neighbor's house is like this bright pink indigo / brown color, what's going to happen to the value of the other houses in the neighborhood? Good, bad, negative, positive? What do you think? Investments in education raise your country's standard of living. Positive or negative, good or bad? Trash dumped upstream flows downstream right past your home. Again, good or bad, positive or negative? Your roommate's a smoker, but you are a non-smoker. So most of these are negative, right? Smoker, that's gonna, the externality is making the air worse for people who don't smoke. Trash dumped upstream, that's negative. Investments in education raise your country's standard of living, definitely positive. Painting, your neighbor painting his house a hideous color, that's negative. That lowers your property value. The birdhouses, I guess it depends on if you like birds very much. I don't know. That could be positive or negative, the first one. Zero sum, this is another term you want to get to know while we get to game theory. When one person or group can win something only by causing another person or group to lose it. And this is externality to a T. So you're playing poker with your friends, you go all in, and the only way that you can get all of the money is if everybody else loses, right? Or other forms of gambling. And that's it for this PowerPoint. So I hope that really helps you with some of the ideas of property. For step 3, I want you to watch this video on your own and think about this question, why we have property rights at all. And then I want you to answer this prompt, why do we have property rights? What positive and negative consequences could come if we do not agree on who owns what? Your response must explain why we have property rights, identify one positive consequence of property rights, and identify one negative consequence of property rights. And what you're submitting is your response to step 4. And I should have it in step 2 as well, too. You should answer this prompt that's highlighted up here. And that's it. Thanks for watching. I hope you all have a wonderful day. Please let me know if you need any help whatsoever.